Hey, it's the Divisional Round Preview of the NFL Playoffs. Welcome to the FTN Fantasy Schatz and Tanier NFL Podcast for Thursday, January 16th, 2025. I am Aaron Schatz. You know me as that DVOA guy from FTN Fantasy, and he is Mike Tanier. You know him from his Substack at miketanier.substack.com. We are going to get to all four games of the divisional round in just a moment. And of course, if you are watching us live, which we do Mondays and Thursdays at 11 a.m., you can ask questions and make comments, and we will talk about them on this here show. Don't forget, we are brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, which is the easiest place to play fantasy sports. It is the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. And they offer a new customer FTN special. Just put in code FTN and you get a deposit match up to $1,000. That is code FTN for up to $1,000 extra. Underdog Fantasy is ready for the playoffs, so check it out. All right, we're going to go in order. So let's start with what I think is the least compelling of the four matchups, which is the Houston Texans at the Kansas City Chiefs. I have been looking and trying to figure out where the Houston Texans offense, where their advantages are over the Chiefs, and I don't think there are any. Their win over the Chargers was very much driven by, I didn't realize how much it was driven by third downs. They had 10.8 yards per play on third and fourth down.
Wow.
So they were like a slightly below average offense on first and second down. And then on third and fourth, it was like whoosh.
That's the Texans offense, except that sometimes there's no whoosh.
Right.
That's them. Their offense against the Chargers was their secondary. Intercepting passes, getting picks, getting the ball.
Right. And this is now Patrick Mahomes, and this is the Chiefs offense. And the Chiefs offense has been better over the last few weeks, not counting week 18, which was, of course, silliness.
Yes.
And I also pointed out with a post about the defense. So here's pass defense as an example.
Okay.
The first 8 weeks, they were sixth.
Who was sixth?
Then Jalen Watson got hurt. And the next 5 weeks, they were 30th.
Okay.
And then the last 4 weeks, they're back to second.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, Jalen Watson is going to be healthy and back this week.
Yes, it sounds like Watson is trending in the right direction. You're right. They are healthier in the secondary than they were, just as they are healthier at wide receiver than they were earlier in the year.
And you look at the Chiefs' strengths. Okay, the Chiefs are fourth in blitz rate.
Yes.
Houston, 24th against the blitz.
Oh, gosh.
The Chiefs are second in the frequency of playing two high safeties.
Mm-hmm.
The Texans against two high safeties, 28th.
Texans against two high safeties, 28th. Okay, probably because at that point they're hopelessly behind if you're playing two high safeties. Because it's just so much fun blitzing the Texans. You're only doing that because you figure the game's over.
And, I mean, the one thing the Texans offense has going for them, looking at the ESPN rates, the Chiefs are only 19th in pass rush win rate. And this amazes me. The Texans are 22nd in pass blocking. I cannot believe they are any higher than 30th.
Well, the problem is you've got teams not just like the Texans, but all of your Patriots and Jets and Giants below them. But that's a bad number for a playoff team, but not a bad number, not a terrible number for an NFL team.
Overall, right.
Yeah. By the way, one quick injury note on the Texans interior line. Shaq Mason is back to practice, but it does not sound like he will return. Juice Scruggs, who was one of the guys who was kind of sort of okay, got hurt last week. He was not available to practice on Tuesday, but he was limited on Wednesday. Keep in mind they're trying to block Chris Jones with the three worst interior linemen you'll ever see in the second round of the playoffs, and guys are hurt.
Yeah, I keep trying to figure out a way to how the Texans win this game. I mean, the Chiefs would have to really implode because even if the Texans pass rush gets to Mahomes and the Texans secondary plays well, I got to figure that the Chiefs offense plays the Texans defense to a standstill, in which case, how do the Texans score enough points to beat the standstill?
Right. And Andy Reid's going to have a very short pass-oriented game plan. He's going to be getting Mahomes to distribute the ball quickly so that they don't get destroyed by Anderson and Hunter. If you are betting the Texans, which I do not advise in any way, you might as well parlay it with like a sack total. Because the Texans win does start with a half dozen Texans sacks. I don't know. Yeah, and probably 2 interceptions because Stingley and Lassiter kind of have to go off or feed on those excess, rushed throws. But I don't recommend trying that.
Michael Allen Brewer also calls for blocked kicks.
Interesting.
Run back for touchdowns. Like just, whatever you can get going. Whatever the Texans can do. They need a lot of randomness.
Right. That's what you're betting on the random. So which I wouldn't necessarily do. The one thing I am looking at, not to jump ahead on this one, but the under's way down at 41.5. The forecast, right? Am I correct on that? The forecast.
I don't have the number in front of me, but it's low.
It's low, 41.5. The forecast calls for freezing in Arrowhead. And I'll just say this in terms of the over-under. Chiefs are 7-10 clearing the over. And the Texans were just 7-11 clearing the over. Even though it's a very low under, I could see this game just being a 31-10, for example, and then you're under Chiefs victory or a 20.
I'm with you all the way. Yeah,
or something like that. So,
right, or even less if the defense plays the Chiefs offense to a standstill, 24-10 or something.
Right. Some low figure where it just sort of becomes, and the Chiefs are better than they were in the past at playing ball control in the second half. So.
The line is Chiefs -8.
I'd money line it with the under or something like that. I mean, I don't mind the 8, but I'd be looking for some tease or something like that. Maybe tease it with putting the under up at like 44.
Yeah, I'm really I feel like it's much stronger than my numbers do that the Chiefs win this game. I'm trying to come up with the narrative of how the Texans win. And I can come up with the narrative of how the Texans keep the Chiefs offense down, but I can't come up with the narrative of how they win the thing overall.
The narrative is 2007 Giants, 2011 Giants. The front four gets a million sacks and a safety and things like that. And then all of a sudden this turns into a weird rock fight and then randomness happens. And that's your narrative, which is not really a narrative. That's more of a wish casting.
Before we move on with more games, Bill Houston has a couple of questions. First, do you have any thoughts on the whirlwind Deontay Johnson free agency tour? Like, I had never heard that Deontay Johnson was a jerk. And then he has really fallen far this year. The fact that he's been on 3 different teams and that apparently all he does is complain about his usage is, he's fallen off enough that when a guy's that much of a dick, if he's a top 10 receiver, you play him. If he's an average receiver, you tell him to go shove rocks.
That's it. And you're like coming on to teams and souring that fast. Not, you just sit on the back of the bench for a while. You're ticking people off that quickly. So I feel like there's another chapter to this that I can't get wind of. This all sounds like something else is going on, that he's showing up and they're realizing he's not in the right headspace to be part of the team, for example. And as for Jason Witten, he may be Jerry Jones.
Right, the other question here for people who are listening and not seeing, is Jason Witten the Jerry Jones Plan B head coach?
Who's Plan A? Jerry Johnson? Jerry Jones? Deion. It's Deion. Oh my gosh! And I was making fun of the Patriots for doing Vrabel. Yeah, okay. He's Plan B. Deion's Plan A, and Jerry isn't going to actually do grown-up stuff.
Yeah, I would hope not. Listen, what I've said about the Deion Sanders thing is Deion Sanders' greatest strength as a college head coach is recruiting.
Yes.
Okay? He got Travis Hunter, the best prospect in the country, to come play at an HBCU.
Yeah.
That is incredible recruiting ability.
Yep.
That is useless in the National Football League.
Correct. And the recruiting ability came from walking into Travis Hunter's house and saying, "Hi, I'm Deion Sanders," and having every family member jaw drop and bringing these individuals in. I don't know what he brings to the table as a head coach. I know what he brings to the table in terms of a self-promoting circus environment, and him and Jerry would be entertaining.
Yeah, and Jason Witten is like hiring Jeff Saturday.
Yes. Like, go ahead. There's another question.
Camden Cap says he heard someone say Kellen Moore to Dallas is more likely than people think.
And and Camden Caps can't unsee it, but we can all see it because again, that's to keep it in the family guy. And Jared loves keeping it in the family guys. And it always looked like Moore was being groomed as an heir apparent, as Jason Garrett was, as Cooper Rush seems to be doing right now, to like rise up through the coordinator ranks. So, we'll see. He seems like a perfectly cromulent candidate, and I think he makes more sense than...
Yes, because Moore is, in a way, he's like Vrabel in that he's keeping it in the family.
Yes.
But at least he's a reasonable coach candidate that other teams are interested in, whereas the Sanders is a joke.
Right, and the Witten is Witten even coaching? I haven't been keeping up on the Cowboys search.
He coaches high school.
Well, that's awesome. That's phenomenal. He probably, Proctor study halls and stuff like that too. I can relate to that. But yeah, I mean, Kellen Moore again. Yeah, he's been a coordinator for 3 teams over the last 5 years. He's a reasonable candidate. I'm not saying it would be this phenomenal hire for the Cowboys, but at least they'd be hiring a professional.
Right. Camden Caps has. I've heard this fantasy story before. Dion to the Raiders.
Yes.
Where they draft Shedeur Sanders and trade up and draft Travis Hunter too. And
sure. Yeah.
It's a great fantasy story, but it's really unlikely.
Isn't it great? And then Chip Kelly can bring in Marcus Mariota and all the Oregon players to the Eagles, and it'll be a fantasy world.
All right, back to the games. Commanders at Lions, 8:00 on Saturday. The only divisional game that is not a rematch.
Yeah.
Between the two teams that each had 3 games this year where they did not punt. It's funny. One of the Lions' special teams advantages is when they punt, but there isn't going to be a lot of punting.
Right. Right. By the way, that kills one of my favorite props, the punt over-under. I guess I could punt under, or maybe the over-under for punts will be down at like 2.5.
It's at like 5.5 or something. So that under on punts might be interesting.
No, that's not fun.
The biggest discrepancy here is the Lions, number 2 rushing versus the Commanders, 26th in run defense and 32nd on second down.
But that could be an issue for a team that is very good at manipulating the sticks and making sure they're in running downs and second down.
Right, and that's not afraid to run in second and long, and doesn't necessarily suck. Like most teams suck when they run on second and long, but the Lions' running game is good enough that they can incomplete pass on first down and run on second down, and it's not the worst thing in the world.
No, it's like it can create the 3rd and 3 that coaches always want with that. And speaking of running, it sounds like Knuckles is back, David Montgomery, to join Sonic.
Knuckles is back, and Bobby Wags has worked.
Yes, I'm trying to figure out how much. I mean, it's not listed as rest; it's listed as ankle. But I'm trying to figure out if it's rest and ankle or ankle.
I think we're going to get Bobby Wags at less than 100%.
Yeah, because he'll cortisone shot or like graft somebody else's leg onto his leg and run out there. But you're right.
And the Commanders were very good against running backs as receivers, and some of that is Wagner.
Mm-hmm.
But Montgomery and Gibbs were number 2 and 3 in value as receivers.
And you're right. A lot of it that they're awesome, and a lot of it was Wagner. I pulled up his stats. I think he only allowed like 10 completions all season, and it wasn't the case where let's get the old guy off the field. He was on the field for I think 490 coverage snaps. He was a cornerstone of their coverage units underneath, and he allowed very few receptions. But you're right, possibly less than 100%.
Here's another weakness. The Washington is 30th against passes up the middle. And where does Jared Goff like to go? More than any other quarterback in the league, by the way. 32% of passes in the middle of the field.
That's
everything. Amazing. It's very similar to Houston, Kansas City in that on one side of the ball, you can definitely see the two teams fighting to a standstill.
Yes.
And the other side of the ball is completely overmatched. And in this case, it's Detroit's offense against Washington's defense is not fair.
It's not fair. I'll give you one more on this. Now, of course, Lattimore was coming off a controversial game last week. Lattimore never plays in the slot. Marshawn Lattimore, I went back 3 years. He has a total in the last 3 or 4 years of like 15 snaps in the slot or something like that. That's usually where Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to be. Amon-Ra is going to be covered by Noah Igbenogany is going to be covering him, and he's been not the worst thing in the world for the Commanders defense, but like that is a mismatch all the way.
By the way, Goff is also better against single high safety than too high, and Washington plays a lot more single high. So, like, again, it's just like we can talk about Jaden Daniels and we can talk about how the Lions like the blitz, but Jaden Daniels is very good against the blitz. And we can talk about the injuries that Detroit has, that even though Anzalone is back, guys like Carlton Davis are still out. And McLaurin is going to go off. And so we're like, okay, Detroit defense fight Washington offense to stand still. How does Washington defense stop Detroit offense? That's the problem.
Right. And you're also, I think, at least in my mind, combating a little bit of the recency bias or whatever of the Commanders having a big emotional win and looking at them and saying, look how good Diami Brown was, and look how good this was. And it was a 23-20 win against an inferior opponent to the one they're facing this week that had this by earning it by doing some amazing things in the regular season.
By the way, the over-under on this game is 55.5. That number is ridiculously high.
Yes.
Like, I would go counterintuitively under. 55.5 is so high. Like 27-24 doesn't make it.
Right. Right. You're up at that 31 to something, 34 to something. Like, have to get in there.
31-24 doesn't make it. 55.5 is a huge number.
If you like the over, this is another one, mess around with your parlays and your teases. Because maybe you can give yourself a couple, give a couple points back to the Lions, take it down to 6, and then take the over under down to 51.5 or something, and still have plenty of meat on the bone. Because you're right, I don't like that over. I don't like betting the under, though, because it's like I don't want to be sweating in the fourth quarter and rooting against fun.
Lions minus 9.5. I like the Commanders to cover.
Yeah, I don't hate that. I think you could do the same thing where you can give yourself the Commanders plus 11.5 and mess with the over-under. If you or 12.5 and really, have fun with it.
Michael Allen Brewer says the Detroit defense isn't that injured, is it? It is. If you've ever seen the list of Detroit guys who are on IR and then remove Anzalone from that list, it's still a big list.
Right, and you got Carlton Davis out now. It looks like Arnold, who was hurt.
Aaron Arnold was good.
Yeah, and he's getting better as the season goes on, et cetera. But there are still all of these guys that you forget, like Marcus
Lee McNeil,
Marcus Davenport, all of these dudes, some of the Malcolm Rodriguez, these second-tier guys who we say Aiden Hutchinson and the rest. The rest are a bunch of starters for a playoff team that are gone, and that's an issue.
Scott White wants to know what broadcast times are on February 2nd, or is there a break prior to the Super Bowl? February 2nd is the Pro Bowl games.
Wait, what's going on? I'm confused. What's the question?
He's asking if there's a week off before the Super Bowl, and the answer is yes.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's the Pro Bowl. That's the Senior Bowl.
Next week is the conference championships are Sunday at 3 and 6:30, then a week off. And then the Super Bowl is February 9th.
Yes. So take a deep breath that week.
Speaking of 3 and 6:30, let's move on to the Sunday games, and we'll start with the Rams at the Eagles, 3 o'clock on Sunday. I think the thing here is trend, right? Because if we look at full season stats, then the Eagles are an easy pick.
Right.
And the Eagles beat the Rams 37-20 in Week 12. 255 yards from Saquon Barkley.
Whoops. That's a lot.
No Devontae Smith.
Right.
But the Rams since then have been a much better team, and they're trending very well over the last few weeks, including the wild card game. And I think that is why this game seems like it might be closer.
Yes. I'm taking a second and vamping to pull up a stat that I've stuck on a document. We all know about the Eagles. We've talked about it a lot, being number 1 in the league against deep passes, the Eagles defense. Eagles also allowed a league low 3.9 yards per pass attempt on passes at or behind the line of scrimmage, screens and screen-like substances.
Oh, so that Puka Nacua screen game is not going to be rocking.
Right. It's the difference between those 10, 11, 12-yard puka gashes, and Zach Barn getting out there and making them 3, 4, 5-yard non-gashes that force the Rams to continue playing and do other things.
Also, the Eagles are the number 1 defense against passes in the middle of the field.
Okay. Now, I don't think of the Rams this year as a great middle passing team.
No, but they will do it sometimes, and the Eagles are very good against it.
Right.
And the Eagles are the number 1 defense when playing single high safety.
Okay.
And Stafford is better against 2 high than he is against single high.
A lot of good matchups for the Eagles defense on this.
Excuse me.
You okay?
Just about to sneeze.
Okay.
I keep talking about the Stafford that you think that Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are going to beat man coverage, but Stafford is much better against zones than man coverage.
Interesting.
And there's Darius Slay and Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, and it looks pretty good for the Eagles.
Right. It's a very good, I think, matchup for the Eagles defense overall. There's also, when the Eagles have the ball, an injury to keep an eye on the Rams secondary. Akilla Witherspoon, who was in and out of the lineup during the season, was playing well down the stretch. He got hurt against the Vikings. He did not practice yesterday. Now, Akilla Witherspoon is their 6'2" corner, and I'm stealing a little from Jimmy Kempski here as I was getting caught up this morning on what's going on. The other 2 corners, Darius Williams and Kobe Durant, are both smaller corners. Your number 1 matchup guy against A.J. Brown, if he's done reading his encyclopedia, would be Witherspoon. If he's not available, that's going to be an issue on the edge for the Rams.
Stafford is the best quarterback in the league against the blitz, and Puka Nacua led the NFL in yards per route run against the blitz. So blitz.
And guess what? The Eagles don't do that often.
Blitz.
They're not a heavy blitzing team, and especially when they're blitzes, it's usually just a 5-man blitz. I think they were very low, maybe last in the league in like 6-man holy cow blitzes.
The Rams also are number 1 defending wide receivers in the slot, but that's 30th. 30th against wide receivers.
Okay, so that's Devontae Smith's problem because he's usually in the slot.
Right, so they may shut him down, but A.J. Brown will go.
And if A.J. Brown is being covered by a 5'9" corner, then that's a problem for the 5'9" corner. And we did see Jahan Decoy appear last week, so maybe he exists. Maybe he's not just a fan in a 89 jersey.
The line is Eagles -6.
Right on the line. Right?
Yeah, this is like a do not bet game, I think. You know what I like is the over.
Where's that at?
43.5.
Oh, yeah, I don't mind that. Weather will be pretty frigid here in Philadelphia.
But it says 37 with a chance of rain. It's not going to be like, wait till we get to Buffalo in a second.
Oh, yeah, that's nuts. My bad. I was looking at Tuesday's forecast here in Philly. I don't know why I was. It's going to be 10 degrees in Philly.
No, it's like warmer than Kansas City or Buffalo.
Right, which means the over-under should be out of the equation. I don't think of Stafford, by the way, as a great cold weather quarterback. That might just be like an anecdotal thing. Remember, Detroit played indoors. But that's right on the line. At 6 points, it's like 23-17 or 27-21, something like that. But I think I'd take the Eagles, maybe the over too.
I think I would take the Rams, but I'd rather just not.
Okay. Yeah.
Bet it. I'd rather just not bet it. I mean, I do think the Rams could win, and I do think the Rams could keep it close, but it's that -6 is pretty close to what I think it actually is.
There's the real world intangible element of things that, this team that's been on the road for weeks, et cetera, that you don't want to.
Yeah. But again, I don't know. Not being a psychologist,
right.
I don't know which is more important. We've been on the road or we're playing for our city.
That's right. Right. And I don't want to pretend that clearly we know how humans behave in these situations. You're right.
Right. Because any idea that you might have that how humans behave in this situation, the Chargers and Rams behaved exactly opposite of each other. And therefore we really know nothing.
Right, which leans towards the stay away. That's why I was saying lean towards the stay away if you're
stay away from betting the game entirely.
Yeah.
All right, now let's talk about the big one. Ravens at Bills, 6:30 Sunday. This game is seen as very close. The Ravens, it started out with the Bills being favored by like 2, and now it's the Ravens by 1.
Interesting.
Which is basically a tie.
Yes. That's not injury news except for maybe Zay, but it's going in the wrong way for Zay.
No, it's people realizing that the advanced stats love the Ravens.
That's it. And then, following the public.
And of course, the Ravens won 35-10 back in week 4 with total domination. Henry had more rushing yards than Allen had passing yards, with 87-yard touchdown on Baltimore's first play of the game. Early on, the Bills had a lot of the penalties that we associate with the Ravens. Yes. They had offensive holdings and unnecessary roughnesses and stuff.
Yes. Interesting.
But for the season, of course, the Ravens were super high in penalties, and the Bills were really high in opponent penalties.
Right. My one penalty before you hit that question thing, 7 roughing the passer penalties by the Ravens defense, 0 roughing the passer penalties all year by the Bills defense. That's not a trend that you can follow in any particular way. It's just one of the reasons why there's a split in the perceptions of these teams.
Iceman says, I think the first matchup plays differently without the stupid trick play fumble. It was 23-10
right
when the Bills fumbled. So it was already pretty much the Ravens were clearly winning when that fumble took place. And the fact is that there were 4 fumbles in the game in total, and each team recovered 2.
Right. That was a stupid play, but then you can look at, Allen had this huge touchdown. Like, well, what if the guy, what if
in the beginning of the beginning of that drive, the Bills muffed the punt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if the Ravens had recovered the muffed punt?
Right.
Joao Pedro says, do we think that Buffalo and Baltimore comes down to who wins at the line of scrimmage? Regards from Brazil. Hello, Brazil.
Hello, Brazil.
So here's what's interesting. The Bills running game, I have to explain because they're like 8th in DVOA, and Bills fans don't understand that because they're 17th in yards per carry.
Their offensive running game.
This is their defense.
Okay, the defense. Okay.
They are really boom and bust on defense against the run. They are first in success in short yardage.
Okay.
They are second in stuffing runners at the line.
Wow.
And they are 31st in allowing open field yards past 10.
Derp.
So basically, they give up long runs or they stuff you at the line, which means I'm not sure if it does come down to who wins the battle at the line of scrimmage, because even if the Bills win the battle at the line of scrimmage most of the time, when they don't, Henry's going to go nuts.
Right. I think it comes down to who wins the first quarter or who wins the first 25 minutes of the game, because the team if a team takes a lead where they can dictate, they're playing completely to the weaknesses of the other team. The Ravens are great at steamrolling opponents, but they're great at, oh my goodness, we're down by 10, let's throw a panic attack. And the Bills have somewhat similar tendencies.
Also point out in the first game, Justice Hill.
Yes.
Screens. Oh my God. Killed the Bills. 3 long screeny type runs and passes, and then one that was a 19 air yards touchdown, like a real pass.
Yeah,
not a dump off.
He's like a little secret weapon, Justice Hill. All he's been doing, in support of Henry this year. Bills have a terrible screen pass defense. That's been all season long. One thing, when I was doing the Bills stats and I was looking at how I worry with some of the Bills stats that they spent so much of this season leading the Jets, leading the Patriots, leading the first game against the Dolphins, leading the Titans, like some of these other teams, that we're just getting like a bad read on their stats sometimes. That they were toying with their opponents for like half of the season.
Meaning that their stats are not as good as they should be.
Right. I think the Bills' defense is better than it looks when we start digging into their rate stats. So I was looking at their passing rate stats.
It's also better because everybody's back, right? The first game against Baltimore, there was no Matt Milano, no Terrell Bernard, and no Taron Johnson.
3 big problems.
Like the Bills' defense is 31st against passes up the middle.
Right.
And 30th against short passes. Right. Which are huge strengths for Lamar Jackson. But Milano didn't play most of the year. And of course, the pass up the middle thing is better in the games that Milano played because he's Matt Milano.
Of course. I saw like their splits on third down pass defense splits are terrible. But then I looked at them and say, how much of this was prevent defense at the end of a game where it's like either they're allowing a pass on 3rd and 5 for 6 yards because they're running clock, or
I'd have to go and look. That's a curious question, I think, for my preview that I write up for tomorrow.
Save it for save it for next week, perhaps.
The other is Brandon Stevens. That's who the Bills will target.
Oh yeah.
They did in the first game. And they did. I think he's the tackle on the 54-yard pass to Shakir where Allen is falling out of bounds as he throws it. Okay. And he wasn't really covering Shakir on that pass, but there are other long passes where he's the guy in coverage.
He's also
they kind of tried to pick on him, and he's weaker than Humphrey or Wiggins.
And he's interference guy. Yes. Yeah, he's.
I'll also point out that both kickers were particularly disappointing this year compared to past performance in case it comes down to that. Right.
Which, again, the forecast calls for
9 degrees.
Oh, my God. That is Buffalo advantage weather. If it's not Buffalo advantage weather, I know.
But that's the thing with the running game with Henry. Is it Buffalo advantage weather?
And remember, a couple of years ago, there were a string of bad weather games of all kinds where the Bills were the team that came up, poor in the wind game a couple of years back.
This is not a wind game, though.
No.
I believe it's just the freezing cold. They're not expecting high winds.
I thought there might be a little precipitation. Also, the wind game was 4 years ago. I'm pulling some Paleo stuff there, but it still feels like that should be Bills weather. That level of cold takes it down to you live in this, like you've driven to work in this, that kind of thing.
Sean Ryder points out that Teron. Yes, we mentioned already. Teron Johnson was injured in the first game between these two teams, along with Milano and Bernard.
Right.
So it's basically an even line. It's Ravens by 1, money line. It's not much difference between that. What do you think?
If it looks like Zay is not happening.
It looks like Zay Flowers is not happening. That's correct.
And I'll wait for that. I'm leaning Bills, unless I hear Zay news that might change the complexion of it for me, based on the weather forecast, based on just the matchups, based on things we talk about on the injury reports, and based on my discomfort that the Ravens, if forced to pass, are going to be able to do it effectively without their screen guy, which is Zay, with their yak guy.
I am leaning Ravens, but not by much.
Okay.
I mean, I would say 55-45.
55% to 45%. That's not your over-under in 9 degrees.
No. I'd say 55-45, like 55% chance of the Ravens winning the game. Like it's like I want to back my numbers, but the injury situation, having the defensive guys back for the Bills, minus Zay Flowers for the Ravens, the fact that the game is in Buffalo. I mean, there's a reason why we're all talking about this game. This is a really close game between two really good teams that are really good on both sides of the ball.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like the justification of the DVOA and everything was, what were the Ravens like? They were like 7-4 or 8-4 at some point, and they were wild card team. And we kept stressing the DVOA, this team is phenomenal. This team is phenomenal. And, nationally, people are talking about the Steelers and everything. And
it was the same thing as last year, which is they had huge wins over winning teams.
Yes.
I don't remember the stat exactly, but I saw somewhere something like 110 point differential against playoff teams where no other team was better than 30. They just whipped the Texans. They whipped the Bills.
Yes.
They whipped the Steelers.
Yes.
In the second game.
Right.
Like they were dominate the same thing that happened in 2023. And then in 2023, they lost in the playoffs. Like they just dominated good teams. But can they do this week and next week? That's the question.
I feel like DVOA, demonstrated that was what was going to happen. And we showed that. And now we're at the limit of tolerances against another great team in a 9-degree day. Where, it's closer to the other factors start to become a major issue.
I mean, I know I'll get criticism if Baltimore goes out of the playoffs again, but I think Buffalo was good enough that if Baltimore loses at Buffalo, it doesn't mean that advanced stats don't mean anything. Like Buffalo's a good team.
Aaron, it's another example of a number one team in DVOA not winning the Super Bowl. Which
There's
clearly,
a lot of examples of those. I don't know
clearly,
why the number 3 and 4
2007
teams seem to win a lot.
Patriots.
But you go back, it's very funny. You go back in time before I even created DVOA, and that's when all the number one teams win. It's strange.
Right. Almost like, again, like we said, like there were fewer playoff games back then, which eliminated randomizing elements, which made it easier to coast to not coast, but like
to get to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl championship.
Yes.
All right, that does it for today's show, folks. Wow, it's going to be a great weekend. We love Divisional Round weekend. And we will be back on Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time to break down all the Divisional Round games and give our first thoughts about the 2 conference championship games. So until then, he is Mike Tanier and I am Aaron Schatz. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you on Monday.